The haunted depths. The sea's mysteries have long captivated humanity, its vast, unknowable depths concealing primordial secrets and existential dread. Among the briny annals are the hushed lore of the Mare Tenenbaum, the haunted seas where supernatural forces hold sway. For centuries, tales of ghostly ships have haunted sailors' nightmares and salted their superstitions. One such legend, whispered in odd tones around the flickering lamplight of ships' crews, has lingered like a malevolent specter, its horrific legacy etched into the very currents and eddies of the deep. The Ghost Galleon. It was the evening of All Hallows' Eve when the luxury cruise liner Arcadia slipped its moorings in Miami. Her decks thronged with revelers in garish costumes, awash with celebration and excess. The hot thrum of music blended with raucous laughter and the effervescent pop of champagne corks. Among the frivolous crush moved Jacob Marsh, his lean, tanned features inscrutable beneath the bronzed goggles and coilskin dry suit of his deep-sea diver costume, a marine biologist in his early 30s. Jacob had boarded the stupendously ill-fated ship on the pretext of lecturing about his undersea research and discoveries. But his true passion was the mania of the abyss itself, the innumerable wonders and horrors that beguiled from the inky depths. As the first plumes of darkness gathered on the horizon, the great ship's running lights blazed in colorful pinpricks along her flanks. With a lumbering churn of its propellers, the hulking Arcadia turned its prow eastward and set a course into the inscrutable Gulf Stream. Cloaked in the opulent festivities below, none could have guessed the unholy madness that would soon engulf them all. By midnight, the euphoric bacchanalian atmosphere had lapsed into a heady assurance, drinks going untouched as heavy shrouds of a preternaturally thick fog gathered on all sides. Soon the Arcadia was utterly engulfed in a dense, roiling vapor, its contours blurring into amorphous shapes as if reality itself was unraveling. Jacob stood lone and silent on the deserted promenade, squinting into that eldritch murk as the first quiverings of dread took hold in his scholarly mind. From deep within the clouded atmosphere, faint sounds began to materialize, a thrum like idling engines, the creak of tarnished wood, the ghostly flap of rotten sails catching a spectral zephyr. Steadying himself with an iron grip on the railing, Jacob peered ever harder into that unnatural gloom. That's when he first glimpsed it, a flickering fluorescence that pulsed in cadence, rapidly coalescing into pinpricks of emerald witch lights trailing off into infinity. Scrambling back in shock, Jacob glimpsed the impossible silhouette through a momentary rent, a gibbering, blasphemous geometry of rotted masts and torn canvas impossibly manifesting on the fog-tossed sea. Only one thought could penetrate the existential horror penetrating his mind: dear God. The Ghost Galleon! Only moments later, the supernatural fog seemed to condense, then violently expel outwards, as if the very atmosphere itself had gulped a breath to scream. Emerging in its core burned a horrifying vision, a decrepit, barnail-encrusted galleon straight from the blackest depths of the 17th century. Splintered masts tore through its mangy sails as if raking the air itself. Its deck was awash in a sickly phosphorescence that tasted curdling. Demonic undulations, ranks of skeletal figures paced its gunwales, their bleached radiuses locked in frozen agonies of damnation and eternal woe. Then, in a cacophony of splintering wood and shearing steel, the Ghost Galleon unleashed its sepulchral barrage upon the unsuspecting Arcadia. Jacob was thrown from his feet as geysers of salt water erupted across the fantail, shredded aluminum bulkheads peeling back like ruptured flesh. All around, decks and railings buckled under tremors of ungodly force as screeching, sodden bodies tumbled into the churning, fog-sized sea, while hundreds drowned in the saturated gloom or were blasted into crimson vapor by the ghostly barrage. Jacob miraculously survived, scrabbling through the panic and carnage. He stumbled into the Arcadia's library, its mahogany hushed and its shelves eerily untouched. Mind numb with shock, Jacob instinctively sought escape into the realm of knowledge. Pulling down esoteric tomes on maritime folklore and the occult, he pored over their browning pages with escalating bewilderment and dread. For the Ghost Galleon was no mere legend, its accursed story spanned generations, dating back to the golden age of piracy. Records in 15th century Spanish and Dutch revealed the galleon's origin as the Baphomet, a richly equipped treasure ship hauling plundered Aztec gold from the New World. When its crew descended into mutiny, slaughter and depraved witch rites on the high seas, it damned them all to a terrible, ethereal purgatory. Their salts were forever cursed to endlessly relive the haunting, murderous cycle, raising their blasphemous hulk from the ocean's floor to prey upon those unfortunate enough to cross their path. With each tale, Jacob grew to understand all too well the full extent of the torment fated for the Arcadia and all on board. His only hope lay in attempting to parley with the pestilent spirit that commanded the Ghost Galleon to make it an offer too tempting to refuse. Reeling from the revelations, Jacob fled the library to find the Arcadia now a hellscape of billowing smoke and sighing vapor. Her one pristine decks ran with rivers of viscera, tangles of hair and sun-bleached bone clashing underfoot. Flickering with lights played along slashed bulkheads dripping with lingering screams. Tranced like a revenant, Jacob saw the last of the passengers and crew fleeing in droves overboard, only to be sucked into the glutted sea. Amidst it all strode the crooked, decaying shapes of the Ghost Galleon's unholy mariners. Each step they trailed footprints of glowing revenants, their armor and flesh sloughing like soaked paper. From the bridge, a cacophony of grasping breaths and creaking timbers echoed like demonic hymns from the Arcadia's ruined throat. Venturing deeper into the bowels of the savaged liner, Jacob found himself buffeted by frigid draughts and glutinous droplets spattered from what living men used to be, at the mercy of foul whisperings in his mind. His journey led to the captain's cabin where answers awaited. Braced behind its steel bulkhead, Jacob peered through the spattered portholes. There, seated amid a scattered costuary of skulls and stalactites of rusted metal, was the Ghost Galleon's unholy commander, a figure swathed in tarnished admiral's finery, its sunken features obscured behind a billowing cape adorned with heathen symbols and charred for. Slumped beside the phantasmy entity were the half-devoured remains of the Arcadia's captain, just another sacrificial lamb to its eldritch hunger. Squaring himself like a medieval peasant petitioning an emperor from the black pit, Jacob rapped upon the cabin door with trembling knuckles. The hulking steel door exhaled a pneumatic gasp, swinging wide as if beckoned by unseen hands. There, awaiting Jacob on the other side, sat the Ghost Galleon's cursed admiral, leering with knife-toothed convicality from the throne of bones and oceanic detritus it had fashioned within the captain's chamber. At the sight of the entity, Jacob felt his very soul turn to Arctic iron, an existential nausea permeating every cell of his being. For confronting him was something wholly alien, a withered, quasi-humanoid presence radiating unfathomable ancientness. Its body seemed an ever-shifting blasphemy of rab-like appendages, trailing amorphous tentacles and mouths that distended from folds of mottled flesh and tar-hued scales. From the locus where its skull-like visage protruded on a jointed, telescoping neck, a single unblinking eye the color of a ruptured dawn blinked judgmentally at Jacob. Tendrils of will and otherworldly compulsion slithered through his mind, peeling back his courage and sanity like the skin from a grapefruit. So, a brave soul braves my haunted cathedral. The thing rasped in a composite wheeze, drawing Jacob further within its chamber. Mouths of tarnished steel blossomed from its midriff, disgorging hands and coffle that reattached in blasphemous unfolding. Paralyzed, Jacob watched in mute horror as the monstrosity reconstituted itself into the semblance of a rotten, burrow-garbed nautical captain straight from the blackest depths of the 16th century Spanish Main. Its sabbard worn trunk thrashed behind its vacant commissar gaze. I am Xickhu'th'yx, eternal subjugator of Baphomet's ransomed souls. State thy purpose, or become filleted grist for my ship's eternal misery. Jacob's mouth ran dry at the malformed syntax, and existential dread spiraling through his every saps from Xickhu'th'yx intrusion. But his love of knowledge finally overwhelmed fear, stabilizing him as he wet his lips and responded, I would parley with thee for the lives of my shipmates, Mr. Xickhu'th'yx. The manifest of the Arcadia still carries many souls, and from my studies I understand your curse to satiate itself periodically upon the living. The apparition inspected Jacob down its aquiline nose, obsidian beak laking contemplatively, refreshingly eloquent for an ape. Proceed. Clearing his throat, Jacob gestured widely at the devastated chamber, marble floors cluttered with human and inhuman detritus alike. On my honor, in exchange for sparing the Arcadia's survivors and allowing their passage from thy haunted realm, I hereby pledge my own soul into thy eternal service. Let me become a ghostly sailor amidst thy hateful crew. Thy damned galleon requires one last hand before it can set sail for the underworld once more. Does it not? A vortex of brooding silence corrupted the air, the undead captain's dissonant stare scrutinizing Jacob's with scrupulous intensity. At last, a hatching of mirth cracked Xickhu'th'yx face into a ridus of soul-shriveling horror, gnarled black flensors extending to clench Jacob's shoulders in a spectral vice. Thine immortal soul hath proven most intriguing and useful indeed, though no mere mortal can fathom the true finality in which it hath been enswaggled. Titanic mandibles parted in a blasphemous cackle as Xickhu'th'yx unlight migrated behind Jacob, revealing unspeakable interdimensional angles. Hours later, as the tattered, unbroken remnants of the Arcadia descended into hushed hysteria, lone souls watched in petrified awe as Jacob's shade-draped silhouette took its place amidst the skeleton ranks lining the Ghost Galleon's weather-beaten bulwarks. And with a thrum of unseen foghorns and the leviathan exhalation of damned spirits, the blighted ship cast off its tattered sails and plunged back into the churning blackness of the abyss, nevermore to haunt the surface world. At least, until its epoch of torment begins anew. In the decades that followed, sightings of the Ghost Galleon persisted, though increasingly scarce and anomalous. Some claimed to have witnessed its rotted bowsprit breaching the mists in Arctic redoubts, greeting the aurora with shudderings of dread. Others still spoke of a lone, haunted figure pacing its decks. Jacob Marsh, cursed to an eternal oblivion as one of the Baphomet's blasphemous conscripts. Those few wretched souls who survived direct encounters grieved of the ill-commend Ghost Galleon's unearthly crewmen shrieking across preternatural gales, balefire flickering behind the hollow stare of their skulls. Claims persisted that its plankworm boards disgorged humanoid shapes seen momentarily winking against ocean mirage-aberrant hands, feelers and mandibles dripping with the ichorous residue of devoured dimensions. And in the fatalistic script of countless found diaries and madhouse confessions, mention of its fell, extradimensional commander would send their authors descending into blasphemous fugues and cloying, frotching mania. Those final written logs told of an ancient entity beneath the Ghost Galleon's timbers, older than the abyss and hungrier than the ocean itself, bidding this time and service to sate itself through an all-consuming rift called the maw which binds. Whether from truth or morphogeny insanity, dark forces yet move unseen in the depths. Perhaps one day they shall rouse themselves from their eternal slumber to slake an immemorial thirst in an unwitting world of light. Until then, woe to those ill-fated souls who traffic the haunted seas at night and glimpse rotten sails against the moon.